You think American food is just burgers and fries that the whole world enjoys? Think again. The United States developed some of the strangest, most uniquely American foods that leave visitors scratching their heads in confusion. Let's dig into 30 foods that are completely normal in America but nowhere else. Corn dogs became an American icon at state fairs, a handheld creation the rest of the world finds baffling. The concept is distinctly American: a hot dog on a wooden stick, dipped in thick cornmeal batter and deep-fried until golden brown. The batter puffs up around the meat, creating a sweet and savory coating that crunches with every bite before giving way to the salty hot dog inside. Americans eat millions at county fairs, baseball games, and straight from the frozen food aisle for quick dinners. Children grow up with them as lunch staples, faces smeared with mustard and ketchup. For most of the world, battering and frying a hot dog on a stick seems excessive, almost cartoonish. But for Americans, corn dogs represent summer, carnival lights, an indulgence that doesn't apologize for itself. The sweetness of cornmeal against savory meat creates a flavor that defines American fair food ingenuity. Spray cheese represents American convenience culture taken to its logical extreme. This bright orange processed cheese product comes in a pressurized can, dispensed through a plastic nozzle directly onto crackers, fingers, or open mouths. The texture is smooth and slightly foamy, tasting vaguely of cheese mixed with preservatives that give it months of shelf life without refrigeration. Americans squeeze it onto Ritz crackers at parties, serve it at tailgates, and consider it perfectly acceptable snack food. For international visitors, spray cheese often becomes the first symbol of American food excess. A product so processed, it no longer needs cold storage. The fluorescent color alone raises eyebrows across Europe and Asia. Yet for generations of American children, that distinctive whooshing sound and ribbons of orange landing on saltines represented after-school comfort. Spray cheese isn't pretending to be gourmet. It's unashamed convenience in aerosol form. Grits are a Southern American staple that mystifies visitors who can't understand why anyone would eat ground corn porridge for breakfast. These humble hominy grits, coarsely ground dried corn cooked slowly with water or milk until creamy, have sustained Southern families since Native Americans first taught settlers their corn traditions. The texture is smooth and slightly gritty, serving as a blank canvas for butter, cheese, shrimp, or simply salt and pepper. Southerners eat them for breakfast alongside eggs and bacon, for dinner topped with sautéed shrimp, and as comfort food whenever life demands something warm. The rest of the world largely ignores this dish, finding savory corn porridge unappealing when polenta exists. But grits carry different cultural weight, tied to Southern identity, to diner counters where waitresses ask regular or cheese, to family tables where recipes pass through generations unchanged. Grits aren't trying to impress anyone. They're honest food that fills you up and reminds you where you come from. Ranch dressing has become America's condiment obsession, poured onto foods that have no business being doused in creamy buttermilk sauce. What started as a salad dressing at a California dude ranch in the 1950s evolved into a national phenomenon that foreigners find alarming. Americans dip pizza in it, drench chicken wings, smother French fries, and pour it onto everything from vegetables to tacos without hesitation. The flavor combines buttermilk tanginess with herbs like dill and chives, creating something simultaneously creamy and sharp. Fast food restaurants keep packets stocked because customers demand it with every order. The phenomenon has spawned ranch-flavored chips, ranch-seasoned popcorn, and even ranch-flavored soda. For the rest of the world, watching Americans consume ranch with such enthusiasm borders on anthropological study. No other country shares this devotion to a single condiment. Ranch represents American excess. Why use just one sauce when you can add creamy, tangy ranch to everything? Root beer is an American soda that tastes like medicine to most of the world, and they're not entirely wrong about its origins. This dark, foamy soft drink derives its distinctive flavor from sassafras root and wintergreen, creating something European and Asian visitors often compare to cough syrup. Americans drink it ice cold from frosty mugs, pour it over vanilla ice cream for root beer floats, and consider it a nostalgic cornerstone of childhood summers. The flavor is complex, simultaneously sweet, herbal, and slightly medicinal in ways American taste buds interpret as refreshing rather than pharmaceutical. Brands like A&W and Barks have served root beer since the late 1800s, building generations of loyal customers who crave that particular foam and bite. For visitors, the experience is often startling, expecting cola and tasting something closer to toothpaste. Yet for Americans, that first sip of cold root beer on a hot day triggers memories of drive-ins, diners, and summers that tasted exactly this strange. Twinkies represent American processed food at its most iconic. Golden sponge cakes filled with sweet vanilla cream that somehow never seem to expire. These individually wrapped snack cakes have achieved mythological status, inspiring jokes about surviving nuclear apocalypse and becoming symbols of American junk food worldwide. The texture is spongy and light, the filling aggressively sweet in that distinctive way only American snack cakes achieve. Generations of children found them in lunchboxes, unwrapping cellophane to reveal yellow cake promising instant sugar satisfaction. When the company briefly went bankrupt in 2012, Americans genuinely panicked, stockpiling Twinkies as if civilization depended on their availability. The rest of the world watches this devotion with confusion. Similar sponge cakes exist everywhere, yet none command such importance. Twinkies aren't about flavor sophistication. They're about consistency, nostalgia, and the comfort of eating something that tastes exactly like childhood remembered. Sweet tea in the American South isn't just sweetened tea, it's tea with so much dissolved sugar that the liquid approaches syrup status. This intensely sweet iced beverage defines Southern hospitality, served at every restaurant, family gathering, and porch conversation from Texas to Virginia. The preparation requires adding sugar while the tea is still hot, dissolving amounts that would horrify dentists. Some recipes call for cups of sugar per gallon, creating a drink so sweet it coats the mouth and provides immediate energy. Southerners drink it all day, refilling glasses at dinner and sipping it on sweltering afternoons. Restaurants offer it free with meals, and servers know tea means sweet unless you specifically request unsweetened. Visitors from other countries often recoil at the first sip, unprepared for such concentrated sweetness. The rest of the world drinks iced tea occasionally, usually lightly sweetened. Southern sweet tea operates in a different category entirely, serving as both refreshment and dessert in liquid form. American cheese singles are individually wrapped slices of processed cheese product that melt perfectly but horrify cheese purists worldwide. These bright orange squares aren't technically cheese by international standards. They're emulsified combinations of cheese, milk proteins, and stabilizers designed for consistent melting and extended shelf life. Americans grew up eating them on sandwiches, burgers, and grilled cheese, where they transform into that stretchy, gooey texture no artisanal cheese can replicate. The plastic-wrapped slices seem wasteful and strange to visitors, while the flavor registers as aggressively mild. European cheese cultures especially find American singles offensive. Yet these slices serve a purpose. They melt uniformly without separating and taste exactly the same every time. For American children, peeling back that plastic wrapper meant lunch was coming. American cheese isn't pretending to be Gruyere. It's engineering designed for consistency, and millions appreciate exactly that. Pop-Tarts are frosted pastry rectangles that Americans consider acceptable breakfast food, heated in toasters and eaten on the way to school or work. These flat, fruit-filled pastries come in flavors ranging from strawberry to s'mores, covered in hardened frosting and sprinkles that suggest dessert rather than morning nutrition. Kellogg's introduced them in 1964, and generations of American children have grown up considering them perfectly normal breakfast fare. The filling is jammy and sweet, the pastry thin and crumbly, the frosting adding another layer of sugar to an already indulgent start. International visitors struggle to understand why Americans feed children what amounts to cookies for breakfast. The concept of hot frosted pastry as daily nutrition seems uniquely American. Yet Pop-Tarts endure because they solve a problem: fast, portable, appealing to children, requiring only a toaster. They represent American breakfast's evolution toward convenience over nutrition. S'mores are an American campfire tradition combining roasted marshmallows, chocolate, and graham crackers into a sticky, melting sandwich that confuses visitors who've never experienced summer camp culture. The name comes from "some more," reflecting the urge to make another after finishing the first. The ritual matters as much as the food, roasting marshmallows over open flames until they caramelize and char, then smashing them against chocolate between graham cracker halves before the heat melts everything together. American children learn this at summer camps, backyard fire pits, and family camping trips, creating memories inseparable from burnt sugar and melted chocolate. The rest of the world doesn't share this tradition, lacking both graham cracker culture and summer camp infrastructure that makes s'mores a touchstone. Attempts to explain the appeal often fail. It sounds like children's food, too sweet and messy. Yet Americans of all ages continue making s'mores, chasing that perfect marshmallow char and campfire happiness. Pumpkin spice has become an American seasonal obsession that baffles the rest of the world with its intensity. Every fall, Americans consume pumpkin spice lattes, cereals, Oreos, and even deodorant without questioning whether cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove belong in these products. The flavor contains no actual pumpkin, just warm spices traditionally used in pumpkin pie. Starbucks launched the pumpkin spice latte in 2003, and America never recovered. Lines form at coffee shops on release day. Social media explodes with declarations of fall's arrival. For international observers, this collective madness seems inexplicable. Why would a country reorganize its taste preferences around one spice blend for 3 months? Yet Americans embrace pumpkin spice as more than flavor. It represents cozy sweaters, changing leaves, and autumn rituals. The obsession has become self-aware, with people joking about their addiction while ordering another latte. Candy corn is the most divisive Halloween candy in America, inspiring debates between those who love its waxy sweetness and those who consider it barely edible. These small triangular candies colored in orange, yellow, and white stripes have appeared in trick-or-treat bags since the 1880s. The texture is firm and slightly grainy, the flavor intensely sweet with hints of honey and vanilla. Americans buy nearly 35 million pounds annually, despite surveys showing it's one of the most hated candies. This contradiction defines candy corn's strange position. People complain constantly, yet keep buying it because Halloween wouldn't feel complete without a bowl on the counter. International visitors find candy corn puzzling at best and inedible at worst. The flavor doesn't translate across cultures. Yet for Americans, candy corn represents autumn itself, a nostalgic touchstone connecting generations of trick-or-treaters to Halloween's past. Red velvet cake is an American dessert phenomenon that confuses visitors who can't understand why anyone would dye chocolate cake bright red. This southern specialty features layers of vivid crimson cake topped with tangy cream cheese frosting, creating dramatic presentations at birthday parties, weddings, and holiday tables. The flavor is subtle, mild cocoa with buttermilk tanginess, yet Americans treat it as distinct from regular chocolate cake. The red color originally came from reactions between cocoa and acidic ingredients, but modern versions rely on food coloring for that shocking hue. Some cakes use entire bottles of red dye. The cream cheese frosting is non-negotiable, providing tartness that balances the sweet cake. Red velvet has spawned countless variations: cupcakes, cookies, pancakes, and lattes. For the rest of the world, the appeal remains mysterious. Why dye cake red? Americans rarely question it, accepting red velvet as its own dessert category. Sweet potato casserole topped with marshmallows represents American Thanksgiving excess at its most bewildering. This dish combines mashed sweet potatoes with butter, sugar, and spices, then covers everything in marshmallows that toast golden brown under the broiler. The result sits somewhere between side dish and dessert, confusing visitors who expect savory vegetables at dinner. Americans serve it alongside turkey and gravy without acknowledging marshmallows on the same plate as meat. The sweetness is overwhelming. Between naturally sweet potatoes and added sugar and marshmallows, the dish approaches candy territory. Some families add pecans or brown sugar crumble, making it even more dessert-like. Yet removing marshmallows would cause arguments at Thanksgiving tables across America. The tradition is sacred, regardless of how illogical it seems. For Americans, those bronzed marshmallows represent holiday nostalgia and the particular excess that defines Thanksgiving. Buffalo wings are an American bar food invention that the rest of the world has slowly adopted but never fully understood in their original glory. These deep-fried chicken wings tossed in cayenne pepper hot sauce mixed with butter originated in Buffalo, New York in 1964, becoming one of America's most beloved game day foods. The proper way to eat them involves accepting the mess: sauce on your fingers, face, and possibly shirt while you gnaw meat off small bones. Americans consume billions of wings during Super Bowl weekend alone. They're served with celery sticks and blue cheese dressing, a combination visitors find strange but essential to the experience. The heat level varies from mild to weapons grade, with competitive eaters tackling wings so spicy they require waivers. International versions exist but often miss the point. Too much breading, wrong sauce, served with ranch instead of blue cheese. True buffalo wings are messy, spicy, and eaten in quantities that would concern cardiologists. Americans wouldn't have it any other way. Bloomin' onions are deep-fried onion sculptures that exist only in America because no other country would think to create a 2,000-calorie appetizer from a single vegetable. Outback Steakhouse popularized this creation. A whole onion cut to bloom open like a flower, battered and deep-fried until golden and crispy. The result looks impressive and tastes like onion rings taken to their logical extreme. Served with tangy dipping sauce, a single bloomin' onion contains enough calories and sodium for an entire day, yet Americans order it as a starter before their steak dinner. The concept horrifies nutritionists and fascinates food tourists who photograph it for social media. Pulling apart those crispy onion petals, dragging them through sauce, represents American dining culture. Bigger is better, vegetables are improved by deep frying, and calorie counts are suggestions to ignore. International visitors often order one out of curiosity, then struggle to finish even a quarter. Americans finish the whole thing and still have room for ribeye. Chicken and waffles combines fried chicken with breakfast waffles in a sweet, savory marriage that makes perfect sense to Americans and confuses everyone else. This dish has deep roots in African American cuisine, particularly in Harlem and the American South, where it became a late-night soul food staple. The contrast is intentional: crispy, salty, spiced fried chicken paired with fluffy waffles drizzled in butter and maple syrup. Each bite mixes savory and sweet in ways that shouldn't work but absolutely do. The dish gained mainstream popularity through restaurants like Roscoe's House of Chicken and Waffles in Los Angeles, becoming a brunch favorite across America. International visitors struggle with the combination. Waffles are breakfast, fried chicken is dinner. Why combine them? Americans understand intuitively the crispy chicken skin against soft waffle, the maple syrup meeting hot sauce, creates something greater than either component alone. Chicken and waffles isn't confused cuisine, it's American genius on a plate. Garbage plates are a Rochester, New York invention that piles multiple foods together in ways that horrify first-time viewers but inspire fierce loyalty among locals. The classic version starts with a base of home fries and macaroni salad, topped with cheeseburgers or hot dogs, then smothered in meat hot sauce, onions, and mustard. The result looks like culinary chaos. Different textures and temperatures colliding in a styrofoam container meant to be consumed at 2 in the morning after leaving bars. The name is accurate. It resembles garbage. Yet the combination works in mysterious ways, each element contributing to a cohesive experience of salt, fat, and carbohydrates. Rochester residents defend their garbage plates with hometown pride, arguing about which restaurant makes the best version. Visitors from other countries, and even other American cities, approach garbage plates with skepticism that often converts to appreciation after the first few bites. The dish represents American regional food at its most unapologetically excessive. Biscuit breakfast sandwiches are a Southern American creation that international visitors often mistake for scones with meat. American biscuits aren't cookies. They're flaky, buttery quick breads served warm and split open to hold breakfast ingredients. Fast food chains and diners across the South fill them with fried chicken, bacon, eggs, sausage, and cheese, creating handheld breakfasts that drip butter and satisfaction. The biscuit itself makes the sandwich, providing tender layers that shatter slightly when bitten while staying soft enough to absorb egg yolk and meat drippings. Chains like Bojangles and Chick-fil-A have built empires on biscuit sandwiches, while Southern grandmothers guard their recipes fiercely. International visitors expecting British scones encounter something entirely different: richer, savory, designed as a vehicle for breakfast meats. The American biscuit sandwich represents regional pride and morning convenience combined into something tourists either embrace or find bafflingly heavy for breakfast. Cinnamon rolls as breakfast food reveal American attitudes toward morning sugar that shock visitors from countries where breakfast means bread, cheese, and cold cuts. These spiral pastries, loaded with cinnamon, butter, and sugar, topped with cream cheese frosting, contain enough sweetness to qualify as dessert anywhere else. Yet Americans eat them for breakfast without hesitation, often from mall food courts where the aroma pulls customers from stores. Cinnabon built an empire on this weakness, their signature rolls containing nearly 900 calories and more sugar than several candy bars. Parents give them to children before school. Office workers bring boxes to morning meetings. The frosting alone would constitute dessert in most countries. But Americans view cinnamon rolls as acceptable breakfast fare, perhaps because they're technically bread, perhaps because the line between breakfast and dessert blurred long ago. The warm, gooey sweetness paired with coffee represents everything excessive about American breakfast culture. Hush Puppies are deep-fried cornmeal balls that accompany Southern seafood meals, confusing visitors who expect something more sophisticated alongside their fish. These small golden spheres get their name from the legend that Southern cooks tossed fried cornmeal to barking dogs with the command, "Hush, puppy." The batter combines cornmeal with flour, eggs, buttermilk, and often chopped onions, then gets dropped by spoonfuls into hot oil until crispy outside and tender inside. Americans eat them by the basket at seafood restaurants, dipping them in butter or tartar sauce without considering how strange fried dough balls might seem as a side dish. The exterior crunches satisfyingly, while the interior stays soft and slightly sweet from the corn. International visitors often mistake them for some kind of dumpling or fritter, struggling to understand their role in the meal. Hush Puppies exist in that peculiar American category of foods that started as scraps and became beloved traditions. Sweet cornbread divides America itself, with Northerners adding sugar and Southerners considering this borderline sacrilege. The Northern version resembles cake more than bread, yellow, fluffy, and sweet enough to eat with butter as dessert. Traditional Southern cornbread contains no sugar at all, staying dense and savory to accompany beans and greens. This regional war confuses international visitors who encounter both versions and wonder which represents real American cornbread. The sweet version spread through chain restaurants and boxed mixes, becoming what most of the world associates with American cornbread. It's baked in cast-iron skillets, creating crusty edges that contrast with the tender, cakey center. Southerners argue that adding sugar ruins cornbread's purpose as a vehicle for pot liquor and savory dishes. Northerners argue it tastes better sweet. Neither side will compromise. For visitors, this passionate debate over corn, flour, and sugar reveals how seriously Americans take regional food identity. Corn syrup appears in American foods where other countries would never add sweetener, a phenomenon that shocks visitors reading ingredient labels. High-fructose corn syrup sweetens not just sodas and candies, but also bread, salad dressings, ketchup, crackers, and yogurt. American food manufacturers embraced corn syrup after government subsidies made corn artificially cheap, replacing cane sugar across grocery shelves. The result is a food supply noticeably sweeter than what other countries produce. Visitors from Europe often comment that American bread tastes like cake, that sauces seem dessert-like, that even savory foods carry unexpected sweetness. The corn syrup saturation shapes American palates from childhood, creating expectations for sweetness, other cuisines don't share. Reading American nutrition labels becomes an exercise in finding corn syrup hiding under various names and products that shouldn't require sweetening. Moon pies are Southern American snack cakes that combine graham crackers, marshmallow filling, and chocolate coating into something visitors find either charming or bewildering. Created in Tennessee in 1917, these round treats became working-class lunch staples, cheap enough for coal miners and factory workers. The texture is soft throughout, yielding graham wafers sandwiching pillowy marshmallow, all covered in a thin chocolate shell that cracks when bitten. Southerners eat them at room temperature, paired with RC Cola in a combination so regional it's become folklore. Moon pies get thrown from Mardi Gras floats in Mobile, Alabama, where catching one brings good luck. The flavor is simple and sweet, almost aggressively nostalgic for Americans who grew up with them. International visitors often compare them unfavorably to more sophisticated confections, missing the point. Moon pies aren't trying to be gourmet. They're affordable, satisfying, and deeply Southern. Deep dish pizza from Chicago challenges everything the world thinks it knows about pizza, replacing thin crust with something closer to a casserole. This thick-crusted creation features a buttery crust pressed up the sides of a deep pan, layered with cheese, toppings, and chunky tomato sauce on top rather than underneath. A single slice can weigh nearly a pound, requiring a knife and fork rather than the hand-folding technique used for traditional pizza. Chicagoans defend their creation fiercely against New York thin-crust partisans, creating one of America's longest-running food rivalries. Italian visitors often refuse to call it pizza at all, viewing it as some American aberration that insults their culinary heritage. The cheese stretches in long strings, the sauce is bright and chunky, the crust golden and substantial. Eating deep dish is a commitment. One slice fills most people. For Chicago, this pizza represents civic pride and regional identity, regardless of what purists think. Scrapple is a Pennsylvania Dutch creation that turns pork scraps into breakfast slices, representing old-world thrift that modern visitors find fascinating or horrifying. This loaf combines pork trimmings, liver, and cornmeal, cooked into a mush that's poured into pans to set, then sliced and fried until crispy. The exterior develops a golden crust, while the interior stays soft and savory, tasting vaguely of sausage with an earthier undertone. Pennsylvania families have eaten scrapple for generations, slicing it thin and frying alongside eggs as a breakfast staple. The concept of eating organ meatloaf strikes visitors as either admirably nose-to-tail or deeply unappetizing. Scrapple doesn't exist outside the Mid-Atlantic region, making it one of America's most geographically specific foods. Those who grew up with it crave that crispy, soft texture. Those encountering it as adults often struggle with what exactly they're eating. American biscuits confuse the entire English-speaking world because the same word means completely different foods across the Atlantic. In America, biscuits are flaky, buttery, savory quick breads served warm with breakfast or dinner. In Britain, biscuits are cookies. This linguistic collision creates confusion when international visitors order biscuits expecting something sweet and crunchy, then receive fluffy bread rolls. American biscuits require specific technique: cold butter cut into flour, minimal handling to keep layers flaky, high oven heat for rise. They're served with butter and honey, smothered in sausage gravy, or split to hold fried chicken. Southern grandmothers stake reputations on biscuit quality, and family recipes pass through generations. Fast food chains sell millions daily. The rest of the English-speaking world remains baffled by America's insistence on calling these bread rolls by a name already assigned to cookies. Funnel cakes are state fair desserts that exist to demonstrate how much powdered sugar Americans will consume in public. Batter is poured through a funnel in circular patterns into hot oil, creating lacy, crispy webs of fried dough that emerge golden and irregular. The cake gets dusted with mountains of powdered sugar, sometimes topped with fruit, chocolate, or whipped cream. Americans eat them while walking through fairgrounds, faces and clothing dusted white, fingers sticky with grease. The texture is crispy at the edges, slightly chewy where dough overlaps, and entirely too large for one person, yet consumed entirely anyway. International visitors watch this spectacle with horror and curiosity. Funnel cakes represent American fair food culture, excessive, theatrical, and unconcerned with dignity. The combination of hot-fried dough and cold powdered sugar triggers something primal, which is why funnel cake stands always have lines. Cool Whip is a petroleum-derived whipped topping that Americans use instead of actual whipped cream, a substitution that horrifies dairy-loving visitors. This frozen product contains no cream. It's made from water, hydrogenated oils, and corn syrup, whipped into stable foam that holds shape longer than real cream. Americans dollop it on pies, fold it into desserts, and consider it interchangeable with whipped cream despite tasting noticeably different. The texture is lighter and more stable, the flavor sweeter and more artificial. Generations have grown up preferring Cool Whip to actual cream, their palates trained on this processed sweetness. European visitors struggle with this concept, wondering why anyone would choose imitation when cream exists. Yet Cool Whip outsells real whipped cream in America, proving convenience and shelf stability matter more than authenticity. The product represents American food science triumph and culinary shortcuts simultaneously. Fry sauce is a Utah invention mixing ketchup and mayonnaise into a pink dipping sauce that the rest of America, and the world, finds either obvious or strange. This simple combination accompanies French fries at Utah restaurants so universally that locals forget other regions don't automatically serve it. The sauce is creamy, tangy, and sweet, providing something more interesting than plain ketchup. Utahns grew up dipping fries in this pink sauce, assuming everyone did the same until traveling and discovering their regional peculiarity. Fast food chains in Utah stock fry sauce like other regions stock ketchup packets. The combination exists elsewhere under different names. Some call it fancy sauce or secret sauce, but Utah claimed it as cultural identity. International visitors who encounter fry sauce either immediately understand its appeal or wonder why Americans need to improve upon ketchup. For Utahns, fry sauce is an improvement. It's simply how fries are meant to be eaten. Ash baking was one of the most brilliant and humbling ways Native American cooks created bread without any tools, fancy ovens, or even a proper surface. When you needed to eat, you did not wait for the perfect setup. You dug into the earth itself. Dough was shaped into rough rounds and placed directly onto a bed of hot ashes and embers, then gently covered with more hot ash. The bread would cook slowly, surrounded by a blanket of heat, becoming crusty on the outside and pillowy soft on the inside. If a little ash clung to it, so be it. You brushed it off and bit into a smoky, earthy flavor that modern kitchens would pay fortunes to recreate. It was cooking stripped down to its raw, purest form, food born right from fire and earth. Today, ash-baked bread might seem primitive, but taste one bite of it, and you will understand exactly why this method lasted for centuries. And if you thought bread from ash was wild, wait until you hear how native chefs used cactus to transform even the toughest, most stubborn pieces of meat into buttery, tender feasts. Smothered ground. Beef and hominy was the kind of meal that did not just fill your plate, it filled your soul. Ground beef cooked slow and easy, seasoned with just enough spice to keep things interesting, and then tossed together with hominy so tender it almost melted in your mouth. If you have never had hominy before, just picture corn but bigger, puffier, and somehow even more satisfying. When the juices from the beef soaked into every kernel, you got a dish that was buttery, savory, and rich enough to carry you through an entire winter's night. Families back then knew that when you needed a dinner that would power you through long days and longer nights, this was it. It was not fancy food, but it was food that made you feel like you were winning at life, even when the cupboards were looking bare. Now, if you thought beef and hominy could turn a plain night into something unforgettable, get ready to bite into a dish that brought every powwow to life with a little bit of crunch and a whole lot of heart. Wild rice casserole was not just a warm dish for cold nights. It was the heart of Ojibwe living. Wild rice, called manuman, was not farmed. It was hand-harvested by canoe, one grain at a time, bent and tapped into baskets from shallow lakes. That alone made it sacred. But it did not stop there. The rice was toasted, cleaned, and then slowly cooked with onions, mushrooms, sometimes venison or duck, and always care. It was earthy and deep, a kind of flavor that comes from fire and patience. But boxed rice came next, and microwave casseroles. Wild rice got pushed aside. Some of what is sold today as wild rice is not wild at all. It is cultivated and flavorless. Real manoomin is still gathered in some places, but the casserole, the real one, is gone from most tables. We forgot the lakes. We forgot the paddles. We forgot the grain that gave so much. And now, it is easier to open a pouch and call it dinner. The trick of smoking corn husks for deep, sweet flavor might sound simple today, but it was revolutionary in the world of ancient cooking. Corn was life to many native communities, not just a crop, but a living gift. Every part of it was precious, especially the husks. By soaking them lightly and laying them over hot coals or wrapping food inside them, cooks could infuse whatever they were making with a smoky, sweet richness that no wood or spice could ever truly replace. Smoking corn husks became a way to turn plain dishes into something sacred, layering that faint sweetness into meats, vegetables, even simple bread. It was an invisible ingredient, a secret handshake between the land and the plate. Today, a few high-end restaurants still use this trick, usually without telling you, because the result feels so natural, so impossibly rich, that diners are left wondering what kind of sorcery they have just eaten. But corn was not the only plant they turned to for hidden flavor and power. If you knew where to look, even the tallest pine trees offered a secret recipe for survival. Crispy corn cakes. Stuffed with seasoned beef were one of those foods you could smell cooking before you even stepped into the event. Little golden discs sizzling in big iron skillets, stuffed to the brim with ground beef seasoned with paprika, onions, and a pinch of chili powder if you wanted to wake up your taste buds. The outside was crunchy and golden, the inside savory and juicy. It was a dance of textures that made you keep reaching for just one more. The trick was to keep the corn cakes thin enough that they crisped up, but thick enough to hold all that seasoned beef inside without falling apart. At powwows and fairs, you would see kids running around with one in each hand, faces smeared with beefy goodness, while the elders sat back and nodded approvingly. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it was the perfect food for big gatherings where nobody had time for forks and knives. And if you think crispy stuffed corn cakes sound irresistible, wait until you pull up a camp chair and hear about the kind of chili that made starry nights and crackling fires taste even better. Salmon baked on cedar planks was sacred fire food. Pacific Northwest tribes like the Chinook and Coast Salish cooked it near the water, letting smoke from the cedar soak into every fiber of the fish. It was fresh, simple, reverent. Salmon were not just food, they were gifts. Their return marked the seasons, and when the fish came back, so did the ceremonies. You tied the salmon to wooden planks, set them near the fire, and turned them slowly, letting every part soak in the wood and flame. It was buttery, smoky, and full of earth. Today, cedar plank salmon shows up on restaurant menus, but it is not the same. The fish is factory farmed. The wood is decorative. The spirit is missing. What was once a ritual became a garnish. But to the tribes, it was a reminder of migration, of harvest, of balance. You do not get that from a 30-minute bake at 375 degrees. You get that from patience, story, and smoke. Using ash to soften beans faster without soaking overnight sounds like a wild trick from another world, but for Native American cooks, it was just another part of making the impossible work. In times when waiting 12 hours for beans to soften was not an option, they found a genius shortcut that we have almost completely forgotten. By adding clean wood ash into the pot, the alkaline properties would work their way into the beans, breaking down the tough outer skins and speeding up the softening process. It was not just about saving time either. In many ways, it was about survival. A quicker meal could mean a safer night, a full stomach before a long journey, or simply a little more freedom in a hard world. Even today, chefs who understand this trick know that beans softened this way have a richer, earthier flavor you simply cannot get from a modern soak. It is a reminder that real food was about more than recipes. It was about trust in the land itself. And if you think cooking with ash is clever, wait until you see what they did with clay and fire to make meat so tender it would almost melt in your hands. Reservation-style ground beef and wild onion tacos were the kind of everyday magic that kept folks smiling even when times were tight. Ground beef was stretched thin, seasoned with salt, pepper, and whatever wild onions could be foraged nearby. If you have never tasted wild onions, you are missing out. They hit somewhere between a chive and a spring onion, with this bold, peppery snap that made plain beef sing like a church choir. Wrapped up in soft tortillas or sometimes even more fry bread, they were simple, satisfying, and straight from the heart. This was not a meal that needed fancy cheese or salsa piled a mile high. It was pure, straight-talking flavor that left you licking your fingers and hoping there was just one more taco hiding somewhere on the plate. Now, if you think beef and onions are a match made in heaven, wait until you taste how a little bit of sage could turn a beef patty into something unforgettable. Clay pot slow cooking was not just a recipe. It was a way of pulling flavor out of the earth itself. Native American communities would form thick-walled pots from river clay, baking them slowly in open fires until they were strong enough to hold the richest stews and slow-roasted meats you can imagine. The secret was patience. Cooking meat in these pots over smoldering coals allowed the juices to stay trapped inside, cycling through the dish again and again, infusing every bite with pure, concentrated flavor. No fancy Dutch oven, no stainless steel miracle cookware. Just ancient craftsmanship and a bond with nature so strong you could taste it. The slow, even heat of a clay pot gave even the toughest cuts of meat a tenderness you would not believe unless you had tried it. In a world before timers and thermostats, this was real mastery. And the taste? It was as close to magic as food can get. But clay was not the only tool they used to summon incredible flavors. Sometimes, the real secret was hidden in something even lighter than air, something that grew tall all around them: corn husks. Bread beef sliders were the secret weapon at backyard parties before sliders even became a restaurant thing. Imagine little puffs of fresh fry bread, split in half, stacked high with juicy ground beef, seasoned with a wild mix of herbs, and just enough kick to make you take notice. These were not your fancy brioche bun sliders either. They had a rustic, crispy bite that somehow made the beef taste even beefier. Toss on a dollop of smoky sauce or a handful of pickled onions if you were feeling fancy, but honestly, nothing beat the classic: beef, fry bread, and maybe a thin slice of tomato if it was growing in the garden. It was the kind of food that got you running back to the table before the adults could claim the last one. You might think nothing could top biting into one of those crispy, steamy little bundles, but the next dish might just prove otherwise. Acorn bread was once a labor of love, a gift from the Oaks. It was never about speed or convenience. First, you had to gather the right kind of acorns. Not just any would do. Then came the leaching. That meant soaking and rinsing them again and again, sometimes for days, to wash away the bitterness. Only then could they be dried, ground into flour, and baked into a soft, nutty loaf. The miwok, the pomo, the chumash. All of them had variations of this bread. It came out of earth and patience. It tasted like the forest in the best way, and it kept you full when little else could. But today the oaks are trimmed, the acorns left to rot, and the bread forgotten. Industrial white loaves sit on shelves. The work of acorn bread seems too long, too hard, too slow. But that was the point. It asked for respect, for care. Pine needle broth was one of the forgotten miracle foods of early America, a natural tonic hiding in plain sight. At a time when vitamin deficiencies could mean life or death, Native American healers knew that boiling fresh green pine needles would release a flood of nutrients, especially vitamin C. It was not just medicine, it was survival in a cup. The flavor was bright, almost citrusy, with a faint earthy bitterness that made you feel stronger just breathing it in. Families would drink pine needle broth during harsh winters through long hunting trips and whenever sickness crept too close. In many ways, it was the original energy drink, long before anyone ever dreamed of cans and chemicals. Modern science eventually caught up and confirmed what traditional cooks already knew. The forest was its own pharmacy, if you knew where to look. And the best part? It took almost nothing to make. Just water, heat, and a handful of needles plucked with respect from a living tree. But sometimes, even when no pot or pan was available, native chefs found a way to cook hearty, life-saving meals using nothing but stones, fire, and ancient ingenuity. Sage-infused ground beef patties might sound like something you would find in a fancy restaurant today, but back then, it was just another stroke of pure homegrown genius. Sage was everywhere in the right parts of the country, and it did not cost a dime to pick some fresh sprigs. Mixed into ground beef with a little salt and a whole lot of care, the result was a smoky, savory patty that smelled so good cooking, you would swear it could make a grown man cry. Fried up in an old cast-iron pan until the edges were crispy and the middle stayed juicy, these patties were tossed onto plates with a scoop of beans, maybe some fried potatoes if you were lucky. They were not just filling, they were soul-satisfying. And once you tasted beef lifted up by wild sage, you would wonder why anyone ever bothered with plain salt and pepper again. Speaking of dishes that hit you right in the comfort zone, the next one was a staple at tables that needed stretching a meal just a little bit farther. Fry bread tacos were not invented at the state fair. They were born out of displacement. When tribes like the Diné were forced onto reservations with nothing but government rations, flour, sugar, salt, and lard, they made something out of almost nothing. Fry bread. It was a form of protest, a survival food. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, it held beans, cheese, and meat, or whatever you had. Fry bread tacos were not supposed to be a treat. They were defiance, a way to stay full when everything else had been stripped away. But now, they are novelty, carnival fare, piled high with sour cream and lettuce and sold for $10 a plate. The story got lost. The pain, too. And what once stood for strength became a guilty pleasure. Most people never learn how close fry bread is to grief. They just taste the crunch and keep walking. But if you know the history, you taste something else too. A hunger that came from sorrow. A meal that meant you were still here. The original food dehydrators were not made of wires, plastic, or electricity. They were built from nothing but wood, patience, and the heat of the sun itself. Native Americans constructed simple wooden frames, stretching thin strips of meat across them like rough tapestries. Exposed to sunlight and fresh air, the meat would dry slowly, losing its moisture but locking in all the rich, smoky flavor. Sometimes the process was sped up by adding a small, smoldering fire nearby, helping to drive off insects and give the meat an even deeper taste. It was a way of preserving precious food without ice, salt, or chemicals, and the result was nothing short of incredible. Chewy, flavorful strips that could last for weeks or even months. Every bite told a story of the land it came from. Every piece was survival packed into a pocket-sized meal. Jerky might be trendy today, but it started here, with hands stretching meat under a fierce sun and trusting the earth to do the rest. But when it came to sweetening up meals and treats, they had another secret up their sleeves, and it did not involve sugar at all. Nostalgic beef and sweet corn fry casserole was the dish that looked like a mess but tasted like a memory. Imagine browned ground beef bubbling under a thick layer of golden sweet corn kernels, all tied together with a few shakes of salt and pepper and a little bit of cream if you had it. Baked until the top got crispy and the edges turned caramel brown, it was the kind of casserole that made the whole house smell like comfort. In the 1970s, every family potluck or backyard gathering had at least one version of it, usually scribbled onto a crumpled index card or passed down by word of mouth. Sweet corn was cheap, beef was precious, and when you married the two together, you got a dish that somehow managed to feel luxurious, even when times were lean. The first spoonful always hit you with that sweet, salty magic, and before you knew it, you were scraping the sides of the pan for just one more bite. And if you thought this casserole was the gold standard of hearty, simple eats, just wait until you dive into a beef and hominy masterpiece that practically invented stick-to-your-ribs cooking. Choke cherry patties were not a dessert. They were survival. Plains tribes like the Lakota and Dakota made them for travel, for hunting, for the long, empty roads of winter. You took choke cherries, dark, tart little things, and pounded them down, pits and all. They were shaped into flat cakes and dried in the sun. That was it. No sugar, no oven, just fruit and willpower. The result was dense and sharp, chewy with a kick. It carried a punch. It stayed with you. These patties were medicine and food. They kept well, traveled far, and packed more than just calories. They were culture, but they disappeared. Store-bought snacks filled the gap. Nobody wanted to pound berries or dry them under the sun. Fast food won. The choke cherry became just another forgotten fruit. Even though it grows wild in parts of the United States, most people walk past it without a thought. But these patties, they were fierce, tough, and they stayed with you the way hard things do. No one makes them anymore. But if they did, they might just remember what it means to carry something ancient in your hands. Rock boiling is one of those lost arts that feels almost too wild to be real, but it absolutely was, and it still works today if you know how to do it. Picture this. You have no metal pot, no pan, nothing but a fire, a handful of food, and a riverbank full of stones. Native American cooks would heat large, clean rocks directly in the fire until they were almost glowing, then carefully drop them into hollowed-out bowls made of bark, animal hide, or clay. The heat from the stones would bring the water to a bubbling boil almost instantly, allowing them to cook stews, boil roots, or even prepare medicinal teas without ever burning the vessel. It was a skill that could mean the difference between an empty belly and a full one. And it was not just functional. It gave the food a subtle mineral richness you cannot replicate any other way. Today, rock boiling feels almost mythical, a forgotten page from a cookbook written by the earth itself. And speaking of earth, some of the most astonishing bread you have never tasted was baked without an oven, without a pan, and sometimes without anything more than a pile of hot ashes. Traditional cedar-smoked beef skewers were one of those dishes that proved you did not need 1,000 ingredients to create something unforgettable. Beef was marinated with just salt, pepper, and maybe a brush of honey if you were feeling wild, then threaded onto wooden sticks and slow-roasted over cedar branches. The cedar smoke wrapped itself around the beef, sinking deep into every fiber, turning a simple skewer into a feast that could make even the grumpiest neighbor smile. You would find folks gathered around fire pits, laughing and trading stories while keeping an eye on their skewers, turning them every so often to get that perfect even char. There was something about the smell of cedar smoke that felt like a hug from nature itself, especially when it meant that dinner was almost ready. Kids would sneak bites straight off the sticks, adults would pile them high on plates, and nobody ever left hungry. And if you thought cedar smoke could work miracles on plain beef, wait until you see how mustard greens and ground beef teamed up for one of the most overlooked flavor combos in history. Navajo blue corn mush was more than breakfast. It was birth, literally. In Diné traditions, newborns would taste it as their first solid food, a welcome to the world. Made from finely ground blue cornmeal, water, and a touch of juniper ash, this simple porridge had purpose in every bite. The ash was not decoration. It added calcium and made the mush more nutritious. And it came from a sacred plant. You stirred it with patience, ate it with intention. The flavor was subtle, earthy, and warm. Some added a hint of honey or wild berries, but even plain, it spoke volumes. Today, it barely speaks at all. Processed cereal took its place. Most Navajo children grow up without ever tasting it. Outside the community, almost no one has heard of it. It became ceremonial, yes, but also silent. It lost its seat at the daily table. Blue corn still grows, juniper still stands, but the mush is missing. And with it, the sense that food could be a welcome, not just a meal. What we lost was not just a dish, it was how we met the world. Sweetening with birch bark was one of the most ingenious and almost completely forgotten cooking secrets passed down through native traditions. Long before refined sugar ever touched American soil, Native American cooks knew that certain birch trees contained a natural, subtle sweetness hidden within their sap and inner bark. By carefully harvesting thin strips and boiling them down, they created a lightly sweet syrup or infusion that could flavor drinks, breads, and even savory dishes without overwhelming them. It was a sweetness that whispered rather than shouted, blending seamlessly with the smoky, rich flavors of open-fire cooking. Even today, a few remote communities and experimental chefs are bringing birch syrup back to the table, rediscovering a depth of flavor that supermarket sugar can never hope to match. But when it came to cooking full meals without pots or pans, there was one natural vessel that changed everything: giant pumpkins, hollowed out and transformed into Earth's own slow cookers. Crispy fried beef and root vegetable pockets were not just dinner, they were survival disguised as a treat. Picture dough rolled thin, packed full of seasoned ground beef, diced carrots, sweet potatoes, and turnips, then folded tight and fried until golden and flaky. It was like the first generation of the hand pies everyone brags about today, only made from scratch, with love and whatever you had left in the root cellar. These little pockets were the ultimate grab-and-go meal before drive-thrus were even a thing. They stayed warm wrapped in cloth, perfect for long days in the fields or a chilly walk to the town market. Every bite was crispy outside, juicy and tender inside, with the sweet earthiness of the root veggies soaking up all the beefy flavor. Families would make dozens at a time and stash them away for later, if they managed to last that long. Now, if you think stuffing beef and veggies into a crispy golden package sounds brilliant, wait until you hear about the Sunday classic that brought sage, beef, and cornbread together into something that tasted a whole lot like home. Venison and juniper berry stew was the taste of the Southwest: earthy, wild, clean. The kind of meal that reminded you how powerful the land could be. You hunted your meat, you picked your berries, you made do with little and made it last. Juniper berries were not just for flavor, they were medicine. They cleared the lungs, they healed the gut. And when they simmered with venison, onions, and root vegetables, they made something bold, something ancient. The stew took hours. It needed watching, it needed presence, and it warmed more than your hands. But modern stews now come in cans. The meat is unrecognizable. The spices, synthetic. Juniper gets replaced with bouillon cubes. Venison gets swapped for beef chunks soaked in preservatives. The result is food that fills but does not nourish. Not really. The real stew has vanished from most tables, and in losing it, we lost a connection to both flavor and place. Using pumpkin shells as nature's crockpots was one of the most visually stunning and practical techniques Native American cooks ever invented. Imagine carving out a big, sturdy pumpkin, filling it with a mixture of meats, roots, grains, and herbs, and setting it carefully near a low, steady fire. The thick pumpkin walls would slowly roast from the outside while the food inside simmered gently, absorbing all the sweet, nutty flavors of the squash itself. The pumpkin became pot, oven, and seasoning all in one, with no waste and no need for heavy metal tools. When the meal was ready, you simply cut into the tender pumpkin itself and ate it alongside the hearty stew it had helped create. It was a way of turning even the simplest gathering into a feast. And if you thought cooking in pumpkins was impressive, just wait until you see how native cooks used nothing but green leaves and open steam to create fish dishes that tasted like a gift straight from the earth itself. Ground beef and heirloom. Bean chili was not just a dinner, it was a memory in a bowl. Picture a heavy pot hanging over a campfire filled with ground beef simmering alongside a rainbow of heirloom beans. Pinto beans, black beans, cranberry beans, all the ones your grandmother insisted were better than anything from a can. The beef gave it depth, the beans gave it body, and a handful of crushed wild herbs gave it a smoky aroma that floated through the night air. It was not the tongue-searing chili you find at competitions today either. This was smooth, mellow, and rich, made to be eaten with big hunks of bread or scooped right out of the pot with a wooden spoon. After a long day of work or a night under the stars, nothing tasted better. If you were lucky, There was always a second pot heating up for breakfast too, because good chili was not something you left behind. Now, if you thought a pot of campfire chili could make a night unforgettable, just wait until you see how a little cedar smoke could turn plain beef into backyard magic. Boiled corn dumplings, canuchi, were food for ceremony. Cherokee families made them with hominy corn and the ground meat of hickory nuts. That is right, ground nuts. Pounded and boiled into a creamy, rich paste. It smelled like roasted trees, tasted like warmth. You shaped the cornmeal into small balls and dropped them into the nut broth, letting them soak up every bit of the smoky flavor. It was not fast. It was not neat. But it was full of meaning. Canuchi was served at harvest, at naming ceremonies, at homecomings. And it held more than just flavor. It held memory. Today, hickory nuts get overlooked, the dumplings replaced by instant mash or boxed stuffing. You can still find canuchi made in some Cherokee homes, but the knowledge is fading. It is hard to pass down a recipe if no one stays long enough to listen. So, the dumplings sit quiet. The broth goes cold. Cactus as a natural tenderizer sounds almost too strange to believe, but it was an everyday trick in many native kitchens. Certain varieties, like prickly pear, are packed with natural enzymes that break down tough muscle fibers in meat. By rubbing raw cactus slices over a piece of game meat or even marinating it in cactus juice, they could turn chewy, sinewy cuts into tender, flavorful meals that needed almost no extra cooking. It was pure kitchen magic, pulled straight from the harshest landscapes. In places where hunting was hard and every scrap of meat mattered, this trick was not just clever, it was survival. No waste, no frustration, just another example of how nature handed over its secrets to those who knew how to listen. The best part is that cactus does not mask the flavor of the meat. It simply softens it, letting the real richness shine through. Even today, modern chefs have started waking up to this forgotten genius. But it was not just fresh meals that mattered. When you needed to carry food across miles of wilderness, you needed another skill altogether: the incredible art of sun-drying meats under the open sky. Which of these American foods would you try first? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another dive into foods that make the rest of the world scratch their heads.